Chapter 4. Everything started in Nibelheim. Although the Icelandic belief system of the first millennium AD was imported by the Vikings of mainland northern Europe, it is not the Scandinavian original, but rather the Icelandic variant of this mythology that is nowadays best known. This is simply because the poems of the Elder Edda were composed and anthologized there, while the prose of the Younger Edda was authored by Snorri Sturluson, a historian and native of Iceland. The country is a beautiful smorgasbord of verdant grasslands, creeping glaciers, and volcanic activity. So it makes perfect sense that Norse cosmology, no less its creation myth, also incorporates such dynamic settings. According to Snorri's book, Gylfaginning, itself drawing from various sources such as the poem Völuspá, the universe began as an immense void known as Ginnungagap. To its far north originated the desolate realm of primordial mist, Niflheim, and to its south formed Muspelheim, the world of primordial fire. Over time, the intense heat radiating from Muspelheim slowly began to thaw the frozen wastelands of Niflheim, causing yeasty rime to drip into Ginnungagap. As the sparks and flames of the south continued to warm the hoarfrost of the north, the seeping gradually turned to icy rivers. These were the Elivar, slowly advancing from the spring of Vergelmir, itself referenced in Chapter 1. And it was from this melted rime that the first being, the monstrous giant Yrmir, was born. Yrmir was the father of the Hrimthursar, rime ogres, and an ancestor of Odin, whose own grandfather was the original god Buri. Having challenged Yrmir's tyranny and slaughtered the ogres, Odin and his brothers created much of the known universe from the primordial giant's flesh and bones. They established the cosmic tree, Yggdrasil, to connect the 9 worlds, with one of its roots extending into Niflheim, where the waters of Vergelmir bubbled. It was here that the dragon Nidhogg gnawed on its bark. An age passed, and the gods settled in Asgard, maintaining natural balance and presiding over the lives of men. It had been prophesied that the children of the trickster deity Loki and the giantess Angrabotha would eventually herald the doom of the Aesir, and so Odin once again took action. Into the ocean he hurled the great serpent Jormungand. To a secluded island he bound the giant wolf Fenrir, and to Loki's corpse-like daughter Hel he gave rule over Niflheim. The domain of Hel, known by the same name, though alternatively referred to as Niflhel or Helheim in some sources, is said to be a dark, cold, and gloomy underworld. Her halls are the destination for those who die of sickness or old age, never having led a heroic life. Hel has no love for gods or men, and was indifferent to their pleas to release Odin's son Balder after his tragic murder, which will be discussed in Chapter 12. The gates to her abode are guarded by the hellhound Garm, who, it is foretold, will break free of his chains at Ragnarok as a precursor to the final apocalyptic battle. Final Fantasy VII's Nibelheim is largely derived from the primordial realm of mist, and its name is very deliberate. Nibel is the word for fog in the Romansh language of Switzerland, cognate with the German Nebel, both of which share a Proto-Germanic root with the Norse Nifl. Heim, on the other hand, translates most commonly as home or home of. It can therefore be deduced that where Niflheim is the home of primordial mist, Nibelheim is the home of fog. Closely related in form to mist or fog is cloud. Given that the series' lead protagonist is Cloud Strife, it becomes apparent that Nibelheim was named quite literally for being the home of Cloud. This etymology has generated some confusion among fans over the years, who believed it to have been drawn from Richard Wagner's celebrated opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen, which itself was inspired by Nordic mythology and the Nibelungenlied, an epic middle-high German poem dating back around 800 years. The terms Nibelung, German, or Niflung, Norse, have been used in different ways over the centuries, most commonly referring to a noble family or to dwarves, neither of which are heavily associated with Niflheim. Conversely, when the Nibelheim of Final Fantasy VII is compared to Niflheim, several parallels emerge. The most prominent of these is the theme of death. Nibelheim is a rural town located at the foot of Mount Nibel, a humble arrangement of stone and pinewood homes with an archaic water tower at its heart. It is a relatively isolated settlement, whose most famous feature is the Marco reactor, situated at the summit of its dark ranges. For decades, the village has benefited from the electrical energy produced there, albeit at the expense of the forests that once covered the hills. Monster numbers have also increased during the same period, lured by the concentrated swells of Marco. On the outskirts of Nibelheim is Shinra Manor, an estate that has hosted countless company officials over the years. It is a terrifying and taboo place for local kids, and there are rumours aplenty of ghastly happenings within its walls. A core subplot of Final Fantasy VII, and indeed the overall compilation, is Sephiroth's destruction of Nibelheim 5 years before the original game's opening. Having come here on an assignment to investigate malfunctions at the reactor and the strange disappearances of its employees, the legendary soldier descends into madness when he uncovers the truth of his past. The entire town is burned to the ground, and its denizens cut down in the street. Among the dead are Tifa's father and Cloud's mother. Sephiroth is eventually halted and killed by Cloud himself, but the incident leads to a massive cover-up by the Shinra Corporation. Nibelheim is thereafter rebuilt and repopulated by paid settlers who have signed non-disclosure agreements, according to the novel The Kids Are All Right by Kazushige Nojima. In Norse lore, Niflheim becomes synonymous with the underworld after Odin exiles Hel there. It is not typically described as a place of suffering or torment, but more a bleak and sad existence for unexceptional souls. This not only creates a parallel with Nibelheim, in that so much of its role in Final Fantasy VII relates to mass death, but also that the atmosphere around the reconstructed town is eerie and gloomy. Furthermore, the unwelcoming terrain of Mount Nibel itself is very cold, dark, and veiled in chilled mists, thus mirroring the imagery of Niflheim. During a flashback in the game to Tifa's childhood, she mentions how many people have perished there, and that locals believe nobody can cross the mountain alive. Her young mind concludes that to die is to pass through the mountain, deciding to climb its dangerous trails as a means to converse with her recently deceased mother. The phrase, "go to hell," was a regular euphemism for death in Viking society, and to reach the halls of the underworld, one had to navigate the treacherous and misty roads of Niflheim. Tifa's theory that her mother's spirit had made the journey beyond Mount Nibel may be an homage to this. However, during her ascent, Tifa falls into a gorge and almost loses her own life. Cloud was following her at the time, but failed to prevent the accident, and is thereafter blamed for it by the townspeople. It is this event that triggers Cloud's reckless behaviour and constant compulsion to get into fights, ultimately leading to his desire to leave Nibelheim and join Soldier. His ambition to become a hero like Sephiroth. What is interesting here is that Cloud's arc is the reverse of Niflheim's function in mythology. The Norse men held warriors in highest regard, and so battle and bloodlust were revered. While Valhalla and Folkvang were reserved for those killed in glorious combat to feast and drink with the gods until Ragnarok, Niflheim contained the afterlife halls of the unheroic. It could be argued that this is why, to escape the mundane existence of Nibelheim, Cloud sought battle and recognition with the Shinra army's elite. The wider spiritualism of death in the Final Fantasy VII universe is also tied to Nibelheim. As detailed in Chapter 3, the life stream is the collection of accumulated knowledge and wisdom from all life in Gaia's history. It is a beautiful concept that suggests death is not the end, but merely a redistribution of energy. The first reactor was constructed on Mount Nibel because the mountain was abundant in Marco, or, to give it its spiritual name, life stream. Since the consumption of Marco, and therefore the life stream, by the reactor is literally killing the planet, this further associates Nibelheim, whose facility has been in operation longest, with death. That said, it is more likely the inspiration for Mount Nibel came from Mount Horai in Japanese literature, itself derived from older Shinto and Buddhist beliefs. In the book Kwaidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, written in 1904 by Lafcadio Hearn, Horai is described as a cold and sorrowful place. The atmosphere there is made of countless souls, and inhaling these will allow one to absorb their ancient knowledge and understanding. Though distinct from earlier utopian perceptions of Mount Horai in Japanese mythology, the similarities to the life stream are unquestionable. Much emphasis is further placed on Nibelheim's water tower in the initial part of Final Fantasy VII's story. It is the location where Cloud and Tifa share a promise that if she is ever in a bind, her hero will come rescue her. The importance of the reservoir is reinforced time and again across the compilation, from Tifa's disc change artwork in Final Fantasy VII and her version of the flashback in Before Crisis, to several appearances in Last Order and the side quest to obtain the Phoenix Materia during Crisis Core. In the original English localization of the game, the water tower was called the Well. Both serve the function of catching and retaining drinking water for consumption by a town or village, though the former is far more contemporary. What is interesting here is that in Norse cosmology, it is repeatedly attested that one of Yggdrasil's 3 roots extends into Niflheim, specifically to the spring of Virgelmere, where Nidhogg and many more serpents lurk. It therefore cannot be a coincidence that one of Nibelheim's most prominent landmarks is a water source, nor that the monsters involved in Sephiroth's dispatch there 5 years prior to the events of Final Fantasy VII were dragons. Additionally, in the poem Völuspá, Nidhogg is said to take flight over Nidarfjöll during or after Ragnarok. The translations are disputed, carrying corpses on his wings. Nidarfjöll literally means dark mountain range, and thus reflects the towering and hostile peaks that loom above Nibelheim. Ragnarok itself, of course, is reflected in the burning down of the town and its resurrection on the same site. It is perhaps also worth mentioning that the serpentine Heg enemy, which appears in the sealed cave of the Gi, situated in the bowels of Cosmo Canyon, is actually a mistranslation of Nizuhegu from Japanese, the direct English equivalent of which is Nidhogg. Though the connection is weak, the underground caverns are the last dungeon faced by the player before Cloud and Tifa's return to the reconstructed Nibelheim. Moreover, the Heg is not the only monster that is curiously placed en route to the town. The area of grasslands surrounding Nibelheim on Final Fantasy VII's world map is patrolled by Nibel wolves, generally fought in packs during random encounters. In Norse mythology, Garm guards Hell's gates in Niflheim, a location known as Nibelheim, and is described in the Eddaic poem Grimnismal, the Lay of Grimnir, as the best of all hounds. Scholars have suggested that Garm and Fenrir are two derivations of the same entity, as both are chained up until Ragnarok and seek battle with the god Tyr. As it happens, the Nibel wolf shares a battle model with the Calm Fang, a foe referenced in the next chapter as relating to Fenrir. Finally, Shinra Manor itself presents significant similarities to the Great Hall of Hell, Eljudnir. The mansion in Nibelheim makes locals uncomfortable, and its haunting aura has frightened children for decades. Over the course of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, several horrendous experiments are known to have taken place in the basement laboratories there. Project Genova S, as alluded to in multiple titles, Elphys fusion with the broken Zirconiad materia, Before Crisis, testing the Sephiroth clones, Final Fantasy VII, and making Vincent Valentine indestructible, Dirge of Cerberus, are all such examples. In Gylfaginning, Hell's abode of Eljudnir is said to have huge walls and gates, though its interior remains a dour affair. To reach it, one must travel north and downwards for 9 days and nights. The description of Eljudnir is not entirely unlike the dilapidated Shinra Manor, whose basement laboratory is certainly subterranean. Dirge of Cerberus takes this one step further, by revealing a sewage network beneath the basement caves, appearing in the 5th chapter of the game. Though not named in the main playthrough, the unlockable extra missions confirm the area to be called the Stygian Sewers. The term Stygian is actually an adjective derived from ancient Greek, where the river Styx was the boundary between the mortal world and the afterlife. Given that Vincent's weapon, Cerberus, is named after the Hellhound of Hades, a more elaborate equivalent of Garm, it makes sense that the game's addition to the established parallels between Nibelheim and the Norse Hell is to introduce an association to the ancient Greek underworld. The town of Nibelheim is steeped in Final Fantasy VII's own mythos, and will be revisited in later chapters of this book. Those well versed in the compilation's finer details may already be piecing together its link to the Odin materia, or the grotesque hell-like form of the female Genova specimen. It does, however, go much deeper than that.